everyone. Welcome back to Event About It, Dynamic Dialogue After Show. I'm your host, Megan Martin, and I am blessed to be here today with Dr. Kristin Malek. And a quick reminder of who Dr. K is. Internationally recognized designer, speaker, educator, consultant, specializing in mindset and behavior change. As we learned in the podcast, she has over 30 certifications in so many industries. And she puts together easy-to-use frameworks that have helped leaders, entrepreneurs, and coaches worldwide rewire identity, spark momentum, and sustain lasting change. She's got a master's degree in international hospitality tourism management from University of South Carolina and a PhD in hospitality administration from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. We're going to get into some of the education stuff because I think it's really interesting that you have some non-traditional outside of the events industry education, plus some formal event education, which we don't see all that often in this industry. I think a lot of us fall into it. Myself, I have no formal event training other than certifications. But let's get right into this. So one of the things you and I've connected over, and we've talked a lot about, and your book, I'm holding it up for those that don't know it, perfectly brings the intersection of event design, neuroscience, behavior science, psychology. And we talked about it a little bit in the podcast, but was there this specific moment where you realized this intersection matters? And that's what I've always loved about events is the behavior science of it. Humans are fascinating to me, and the way the brain works is so interesting. And that absolutely relates in events. I've always said that I'm not curing cancer. I'm not doing brain surgery, but I design spaces where those people can come together to help solve those big, huge problems that impact communities, can save lives. So is there a moment where you were like, man, all of these things play into it and I can be a better designer if I understood this?
Yeah. When I'm talking about behavioral science and psychology and neuroscience and how they all play together with events, and it really comes down to how the content that transforms people. So if I was thinking about a second standout moment that really altered my my life path of where I was going, it really kind of unfolded it in the last decade is this concept that even if we're designing these really powerful experiences, these people, these humans, these event professionals, these attendees, these speakers, they're bringing their own I call it stuff, right? Because it's the polite way of non-cussing, but that stuff with them.
Hey, my favorite part about this podcast is that we get the E explicit. So if you have a 4-letter word, let it rip.
Okay, there we go. And noted. So, everyone's bringing their stuff with them, right? They have their filters, they have their blocks, they have the limiting beliefs, they have their imposter syndrome and their perfectionism, their conditional worthiness. If you've never heard that term, look it up. You'll go on a rabbit hole. But you can create the perfect environment. But if someone's mindset is saying, I'm not ready, or this isn't for me, that change will never stick. And so that realization for me was so impactful because it made me expand from just designing events to designing people's growth. So my work isn't just about designing an audience experience anymore. So people who knew me way back in the day when I was just event design, they're like, oh, you do all this other stuff now. It's like, yes, because we have to help these leaders and entrepreneurs and change makers and everybody how to design their own mindset and behavior first, because they have all this stuff going on, right? And because the truth of it is you cannot lead transformation externally until you have designed it for yourself internally. It just won't happen, right?
Yep,
I hope that was good.
No, you're exactly right. We bring so much baggage into every conversation. And I think that's probably part of what intrigues me about humans is we're all on the same planet having lived different experiences. And we bring those perspectives and experiences into every conversation that we have, how we approach the world, how we approach events, how we want to take away things from events. And I don't know. I'm fascinated by all of it. I could go on tangents all day for it. So, but one of the other things, Nick, talking about your diverse background, I think your undergrad is in interior design and how that leads into event design. Having formal education in the event space is just a newer thing now. In the last probably 10 years, we're seeing master's degrees pop up, PhD programs pop up across the country. Do you think or have any advice for someone thinking about the industry or wanting to advance in their career? Should they get these event degrees, or is something broader like an MBA or communications or marketing maybe a better path because they're translatable skills?
I always tell my event students, right? Because I teach, well, now I only teach one event class a year, but because we've got some designing, mindset, behavior change, and other topics. But I tell my event students, I say, this job, this degree is not going to help you get the job, right? Because you need experience. Like, you need those internships. You need to get your feet wet. You need to get in there, right? It's not going to like get you a management level job just because you have a bachelor's degree in events. No one cares about that. They care about your experience. But what it will do is it will prepare you with the mindset and strategy and design to elevate faster once you have that experience, right? Because you're going to see things in a different way. You're going to speak up more about different ideas and different topics because you see it all, right? Now, if you are actively in the industry right now and you have, 3 to 7 years of experience and you're looking for a master's degree, I am a huge advocate for the MBA. It's actually the only one by research that has shown that it will actually like statistically significant increase your salary, right? Because there's accreditations and there's standards like around the world for the MBA. Every college has the exact same core, like 30 credit hours. Doesn't matter where you go. The only difference is in the electives. And so it has become like a powerhouse about strategy, right? And case studies. So if you are out there in the industry and you're looking for formal education, of course, you can always come and work with me. But I definitely recommend the MBA, right? For sure.
I wish I had an opportunity to do a joint master's program. And at that point, I was like burning out in school. And it's one of the biggest regrets of not just spending one more year to take the 6 more classes to get my MBA. Like, I should have just done it. I'm going to have, like, at some point, I'm probably
Mm-hmm.
going to go back to school and get one for sure. Well, that also leads me. So you talked about you teach one event class, you used to teach more.
Mm-hmm.
Working with students every day, does that give you a different perspective on the industry?
Yeah, I think it comes from two folds, right? Like, one, I have a perfect lab for me to try out new ideas, right? Like, hey, I have a new framework. Let's try it out on the students, right? Because if you actually look at the definition of events, right, which is two or more stakeholders coming together for a common purpose, right? Every single class is an event if it's designed properly, right? Like, if I'm
Yeah.
teaching about site selection, I'm not going to teach them a PowerPoint. I'm going to take them on sites, right? I'm going to walk them around and show them what site selection is because I'm designing that event, that experience, that learning, right? Event specific to those objectives. It's just teachers don't often do that, right? And so if you're thinking about it in that perspective, I have a natural lab that I get to play with all these ideas. And then on the flip side, right, I get to see the evolution of the next event participants, right? So I can see their mindsets. I can see how to engage them, not just as participants, but also as employees, right? I speak a lot to like recruiters and lodging companies, like how do we best recruit students and what do they look for, right? But what I see in students right now, I'm laughing because the whole 6-7 trend is like such a
I
thing.
was gonna
But
say, have you taught you anything?
right, so I'm so lucky and thankful. It's by design, of course, right? But my students are the ones that like I tell them I'm a teacher for a semester, but I'm your mentor and friend for life, right? Like you can always come and talk to me and follow up with me. And so I don't get 6-7, but I was like the first teacher to understand what 6-7 meant. Which was great. So, like, I mean, just keeping up there. But I'll say, like, seeing the shift of students, seeing the shift of their purpose and their mission, right? So, these students that I have right now in 2025, right? They're not asking, like, how do I plan a perfect event? They're not asking about, like, risk management, though sometimes they should be, right? They're asking, how do I create something that actually matters? And so, yeah, it does give me kind of a unique perspective where I get to like see both ends of the spectrum, which is kind of fun.
Yeah, that is. I think I was teaching for a little bit when I was in Denver, and at the time, this was pre-pandemic. there definitely was the conversation of like, how do I plan the best parties? Like
Mm-hmm.
it was all very social.
Mm-hmm.
Like I wanted to be pretty and beautiful and everyone have a good time and have the
Yeah.
best DJ. And that shift definitely is
Yes.
like, how do I plan something that matters?
Yeah.
I
Oh, and
love
you
that.
can see it. Like, because I'll ask students, like, what do you want to go into? Right. And it's everyone always thinks it's weddings. It's not like these students are not all coming in wanting to be wedding planners. Like, yes, that solid 10%. But I saw a shift, like 10 years ago when I started teaching part time, it was like everyone wanted to go into concerts and then everyone wanted to do nonprofits. Right. And they didn't know what associations were right at that time.
Sure.
And then, you can see the shift and the progression over time of what's drawing them. And right now, they want to do things that matter, that like change the world and leave the world a better place.
uh, I think we all would love that. And I'm glad to see them next generation coming in already asking those why questions and not the everyone had a great time. We had 1,800 people or 18,000 or 100,000 people at our event. Okay, let's shift gears just a little bit. One of the things you wrote in your book that really stood out to me, and this like hit me to my core because it's so true. You wrote, "The more you learn, the more you don't know." And I end up down these rabbit holes. That's why I have a library in my house because I have books on like all kinds of topics. I read about retail therapy, retail psychology. I think that also plays into a lot of like sales and how we buy in the business world. So that can either be really profound or also very exhausting because you end up down these rabbit holes of like learning and like I'm just a consumer of knowledge, which is sometimes to my detriment.
Yeah.
But what's something you've learned recently that maybe completely flipped your understanding of human behavior?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, to like speak to your either or, like valid, it is both. It is both profound and exhausting, right? That line is basically my daily life, right? So when I think of something that shifted my perspective of my understanding of human behavior, I would say, so it's not super recent, but what really flipped my understanding of human behavior was when I was learning about all the different systems in the brain through like a neuroscience intensive workshop. It was in Austin. It was like 14 super exhausting days, right? And what I learned was how much our brains value safety over success. So back in the day, I used to think that people resisted change because they were like lazy or unmotivated. They didn't want to get up and work out. They didn't want to meal prep, right? They were lazy or unmotivated. But when you actually look at the science and human behavior, it turns out their brains are just trying to protect them, right? Because the brain doesn't actually care if you're miserable, which is super sad, right? Your brain doesn't care if you're miserable. It cares if you're familiar. It cares if you're predictable. So even when someone wants change, right, they say they want it, their subconscious says, but at least I know this misery. This misery is safe, right? So when I started really digging into that about human behavior and seeing it in coaching and in classrooms and in leadership teams, I realized that so much of our work in behavior change is actually not about adding new information. It's about helping people feel safe enough to actually try something new. And that's where that design comes in, because if you design for safety first, then transformation is much easier and it can actually happen, right? So that was a huge shift for me, was designing environments for safety, and how we can do that from a sensory perspective as well, which is pretty interesting. So,
Yeah, I love that. What's something that we can do at events to create some of that safe environment so that people want to grow, want to change, take information home that could be transformative?
yeah, absolutely. I think it's chapter 5, I give this huge analogy for your brain, which is the garden. And we talk about how your conscious mind is only 5% and your subconscious or unconscious mind is 95%. And so much of planning and design right now is targeting that 5%, right? It's targeting our logic, our structured creativity, our rational part of our brain. And if we're really wanting to create safety, we have to design for that subconscious, unconscious part of our brain. And That can come from such a wide variety of angles, super specific to your target market, right? That can be something simple as like how your room is set up and the lighting used, right? With the what kind of music you're using. I go into like these frequency things now, because certain sound frequencies do different things to our bodies, right? So all these different perspectives that can create this kind of like environmental safety that makes us like settle in and say, I'm in a safe space before anybody even talks, right? Because then when people talk, then it's like speaker coaching at that point.
For sure. So thinking like walking into a breakout, like
Mhm.
keynotes, I think are always
Yeah.
going to have the flashy lights
Mhm.
and the big
Yeah.
screens,
Yeah.
and it's going to be more entertainment than transformation, which is great because I think you need a balance. Talking about that progression, we're going to get into some of the content here next. But walking into a breakout session, what are a couple things that a planner could do? Like, I love the frequency. So maybe instead of music, maybe it's brown noise or green noise. Maybe the lights are a little dimmer. Like, what are a couple environmental things that we could throw in a breakout session so that you know as soon as you walk in, this is safe and I'm about to learn something I'm going to take home?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to say the easiest thing that people for some reason don't like to do because we're trying to maximize seating all the time, right? Is being radically inclusive with seating options. So this can look like having the high boys for people to stand at, having rounds for people to sit out with other people, but also having seats where people can sit by themselves, having some things on the floor like the bean bags or the yoga mats, having, I saw one, this would be expensive, right? It's a budget thing. But I was at one event where they had like the treadmill walking pads that you could like actually walk while you were back there. And so I think when you walk in and you can choose, right, the seating or the standing that works for you and not being forced to like sit down and be quiet and listen, or forced interaction where you have to sit down at a table with other people and you're forced to interact with them, like that's the number one easiest way to like set up a safe environment where people can choose their level of involvement with the surroundings around them.
I love that. Okay, so thinking about not just environment, but talking content, one of my absolute favorite lines, and we've kind of touched on this a little bit already, is event planners design environments, not content. So we've talked a little bit about how to set the environment, but one thing I'm curious, and you talk a lot about this in the book and also on the podcast, is the flow of that content, right? Because people are coming for experiences. It's always the debate is it experience or is it content that people come to events for? And I think it's a little bit of both. Like, they want networking and they want the content. So
Mhm.
where do we design a flow with content? Like, where do you even start to put an agenda together that pulls out the dopamine, that lets me walk away saying, wow, I actually am inspired and learned something?
Yeah, this is a multi-pronged sword in some ways. I will
Yeah.
answer it with how we should approach it, but then I also have to have that pre-frame to acknowledge that most times event planners are what I call in the book one step removed, where we're not actually in control of some of these things, right? And so if you're an event planner that is, doing all the logistics and coordinating all the things and doing design, but there's like a speaker board or like a content or research board, and they're deciding the speakers and they're doing all those things, you actually can't really control it unless you're like working directly with that board and strongly advocating with lots of education, right? But if you are an event professional who gets some say in the content and the structure and the flow, I would say the real issue with all of this content right now, it's yes, it's overload, but it's not just overload of content, it's disorder, right? So as we mentioned earlier, planners build agendas based on oftentimes speaker availability, right? They'll say, well, I have this opening here, or I have this opening here, or they'll have a theme, right? And you talked about earlier, like, okay, we have a theme and we have this change and we have these 6 speakers, and then you just like haphazardly put them in there, right? Because you don't know their deck and you don't know their content, you don't know how it's all going to flow together because you have 3 bullet points and a title, right? That's what you have.
Yep.
But when planners can build agendas so that all that content flows, because right now your brain goes from like, okay, this session is like high level strategy, and then you have hyper specific tactics, and then you have a panel, and then you have like big ideas. There's no like roadmap, right? There's no path. It's just like a random playlist of smart people talking, and then your brain's overloaded from that, and then you're stuck trying to piece it all together, right? And sometimes you don't know how to piece that together, and then your brain's exhausted, right? And so when you actually look into brain science, brains learn in sequence, right? So if you want to change behavior, your content needs to stack, right? So you have to have awareness, and then you have to have understanding, then you have to have application, and then you have to have reflection. And when you design that flow intentionally, where every session is building on the next competency, you reduce like all of that competing for attention, right? And that is how you can create transformation through the flow. It's not about having the most content. Please let me repeat that. It is not about having the most content. It is about designing the pathway through that content, right? So, yes. Great
So in
question.
an ideal world, if we're applying what you just said about every session stacks onto the other session, what does an ideal agenda look like? So let's say we have a 3.5 day conference, right?
Mhm.
It's let's throw a scenario out there. It's a medical
Mhm.
conference or a marketing conference, 3.5 days. What
Mhm.
does this flow kind of look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of gave you the 4 steps that I'm always kind of planning around in the pathway, and that's awareness, understanding, application, and reflection, right? And so when we talk about, I'm laughing because I'm, again, not the person to be preaching this, but we talk about sleep, right? And sleep is so important for like having random facts go into short-term memory, and then short-term memory is making meaning, right? And then it goes into long-term memory. You're forming the neural pathways, right? I can get really dorky about it. But that first day has to be about like the awareness. So if you are doing your socio demographics, if you are doing your behavioral path of like, I am targeting, event strategists who have over 10 years of experience in this field, and I am trying to take them from this point to this point, right? So first you have to have awareness of like where they're at and what's not working, right? It's all their pain points. And then they have to be able to like have understanding around that. So if it's a 3-day event, you've read the book, I love things in 3s and 5s as well. So like awareness and understanding can kind of go together, but then you have to sleep, right? Because that's where your brain's making meaning. And then you go into application. So then you have the application portion. So you're taking all this understanding now and then you're applying it. And that's going to be different depending on your target market, right? So if you have doctors, you have awareness of the problem, and then you have your application of the problem, right? And then you can apply for a day, day and a half. And on that last day, you have reflection. And this is not just like, hey, we're going to do sunrise yoga and have like a question we're going to think about, right? This is like designed, intentional, not just like a journal on your own kind of moment, right? So, one super quick example, I just ran an event. It was a 3-day conference, right? And we did this like super fun. We had split everyone up into groups, and they were doing like a journey through this. And they had like a homework assignment, right? So they got together in their little groups. Is the last morning, right? It's the second to last session, and they had 5 minutes to put together like a slide deck, and they had to like put pictures from the conference and their key takeaways and all their things, and then they had to actually share it out loud in 3 to 5 minutes, right? So we had 40 people in this room, and so everybody had 5 minutes. So we had scheduled like 60 to 90 minutes. It was hilarious. People loved it. People loved the storytelling. It was so fun. But then they were actively reflecting. They had to reflect on their experience internally and then externally. And then everyone else had those moments of like, oh, I didn't do that, but that's really cool. And then they got those takeaways and those nuggets. It was just very well designed, where everybody was like laughing and having fun, but also, most importantly, reflecting on it. So, yes, take that, steal that. That's fine.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I think that's a smaller program where like you can actually go around the room and share, but like a conference at scale, like use a
Yeah.
poll. Like give people a minute at the closing keynote
Yeah.
to sit and think about it, and then have a word cloud maybe pop up on the
Mhm.
screen where people are, submitting things in. Like all of these ideas can
Mhm.
be scaled with
Oh yeah.
technology, which is the beauty
Mhm.
of it. But I think that gives us a great path to
Yes.
design better events and have the content stacking. The other thing you mentioned that we talked a little bit in the podcast as well is that, and you wrote this in the book, sleep is critical to the process and change, which for most meeting planners immediately disqualifies us, because my biggest event in this industry is like we treat burnout like a badge of honor, and I'm so absolutely over that. So what do you think would happen, and any advice you would give, if we actually designed rest into events? Like what does that look like? Does that mean not doing sunrise yoga and midnight karaoke? Like how do we put rest in the agenda to also protect the planners? Like these are long, long days. And not only do we make better decisions as event professionals when we're rested. So where do we work that into agendas to save our attendees, but also save ourselves?
Yes, no, absolutely. I will say I have a sign hanging on the wall opposite of my bed. So when I'm laying there and my head's in the pillow, I see the sign every single night for at least 3 years now. And this sign says, instead of asking, have I worked hard enough to rest? I've started asking, have I rested enough to do my most meaningful work? And that is like a constant reminder for me. I can say it verbatim right now. Like I stare at it literally every night for like over 3 years, right? And yet still, if you know me in real life, you also know I shouldn't be speaking about sleep, right? I think it ebbs and it flows for planners, for attendees, it ebbs and it flows. But it is super important to make sleep the norm and not the exception, right? And so when we're looking at an actual on-site event and we're talking about behavior change, I think it's really important to decouple some of the myths, right? But which can really help us be intentional about designing it. So if planners design rest on purpose, I think that we would stop confusing exhaustion with excellence. Because right now we have those kind of like intermingled in our minds. Like exhaustion is excellence. And I know we've talked about this before, but our industry, at least half of it, right? We wear burnout like it's a badge of honor, right? It's a badge of honor. But the reality is that fatigue kills creativity. And so when we actually look at the statistics, the research, right? The neuroscience and the behavioral science, rest is not the absence of productivity. It's actually an amplifier of it. It's the reset button that lets transformation like actually land. And so I think when we're in a conference setting or an on-site experience or even like an online experience, which is super fatiguing as well, I think it's really important to have boundaries, right? And not just to say like, okay, we're not going to have stuff here, but like our sponsors can do that, right? Our sponsors can have evening events and dinner events and like late night events, and they can have the bar things. Be like, no, like this is time for our attendees. But in order for that to be successful, there has to be the educational component with it. Because if we don't educate why we're doing something and why it matters, then we've missed the whole point, right?
Yeah, agreed. It reminds me of like one of my favorite shows is Parks and Recreation, and it just reminds me after the episode after Harvest Festival, and all the city council people are looking at Leslie like, we can't wait for your next big idea, and she can't come up with anything. And so they take her to this, like they're supposed to go camping, but they end up at this Airbnb, and Ron Swanson locks her in a room and says, turn your brain off. Like you're not coming out of this room. Sleep and turn your brain off. And she does. And the next day she has like 50 ideas of and she like wrote it all on like a napkin. And I think some of those best moments happen. And to your point, the creativity comes out when we actually
Yeah.
turn our brains off and give it time to rest.
Well, and I would just say, like, yes, I absolutely think we are addicted to burnout, but it's not because we love pain, right? It's because our brains are confusing it with purpose. And we're purpose driven people, and our brain has mixed that up somewhere, right? That exhaustion is related to like meaning is related to purpose, and it's just not true. It's a myth, and so we just have to decouple it, right? So
I think that's a bad habit we need to change. So let's just say the event industry was one of your behavior change clients.
Yes.
What's a bad habit that you would coach out of all of us first?
Oh my goodness. I would say the one that I would probably do is I would say people pleasing. The first habit I would break is people pleasing because I think as an industry of professionals, we are like the yes people. We say yes to everything, every idea, every client request, every sponsor, like everything our bosses say or our committees say. Every time there's like, can we just add one more thing? And then we're like wondering why we're exhausted and why we're disconnected from our own purpose. But we have literally built an entire culture around over delivering. And we just have to realize that at some point, this stops being service and starts being its own form of like self erasure, right? Because boundaries are not barriers, they're actually design tools and they protect that energy we need to stay creative. And without that, we're just like managing chaos. We're not like creating real change. So I would say people pleasing for sure.
I completely agree with that. And I I have no follow-up comments. That's just the best. Yes. Okay. Last couple topics here. So one of the other things that we've connected on over the years, and you write in the book, a curious brain is a learning brain. I have gotten in trouble my pretty much my entire life for asking why questions, not as a form of like rebellion, but of understanding and curiosity, because I have such a curious mind, which is why humans fascinate me because it's like the ultimate science. We're all so different. So, was there a moment in your own career where curiosity completely changed your path? And I think I know the answer to this because we've kind of already talked about it, but I'm curious.
Yeah. Okay, well, you've like now challenged me where I'm gonna say yes, but I'm gonna give you like something you've never heard before.
Okay,
You're like, I've
let's
heard
hear
it,
it.
and I'm like, I must give Megan something new. So, okay, so about 15 years ago, I was a grad student, right? Officially a grad student, and I was working in the office late one night. And my phone was ringing, and I accepted this phone call. It was from a close family member, or, you know, she was close at the time. And she was so deeply upset. She was like crying. And she would say, right, at that time, her life was a mess, like relationships, all the things. She was about to get fired from her job at McDonald's. And she was just barely like younger than me. And so, like, I'm not going to talk about trauma or traumatic childhoods or anything, but the two of us did share kind of like similar buckets or categories of trauma. And I'm like sitting there on the phone, right? If you're watching the video, I'm like doing the phone thing. It's now like this, not like this,
Well,
right? But,
like this.
right? Exactly. I'm aging myself now. But I was sitting there on the phone and I just like so distinctly remember listening to her and that moment of curiosity when I asked myself, right? Why and how did my life turn out so differently when our upbringings were so similar? And that was the first time I had asked a why question, like about myself, instead of like, I wonder why they're doing that. I wonder why this is the way it is. I wonder why that's happening. Right. And so that actually led to this like obsession with figuring out like who I was and how and why I worked. There's actually like a video of me on YouTube where I'm like on a main stage sharing this point and like my journey of unlearning myself. And I would say, like, yeah, that singular kind of curiosity point of like turning the curiosity inwards, it changed like my entire perspective on life and how I design for mindset. So, was that new for you, Megan?
That was new. And
Good.
I love the introspection because I think
Mm-hmm.
more people would
Mm-hmm.
end up better humans, more empathetic humans, if we had a little more introspection about why we react or behave in the way that we do. I mean, one of my favorite things about the next gen kind of coming in is they love therapy and they love the self-reflection and the understanding the why and making active decisions to maybe change some of the reactions and the way they respond to things. Which kind of gets me into my next question of, do you think curiosity scares leadership because it disrupts control? And I think that's, for me, curiosity and control have always kind of gone hand in hand, where I think people, my personal opinion, people who are less curious are even more control freaks because curiosity is uncomfortable, and having to unlearn and think again and maybe challenging yourself, that's a hard thing to do for a lot of people. So do you think curiosity forces leadership to admit maybe they don't have the answers, and that's a scary
Mhm.
place to come from?
Well, Megan, in the world of research, we would call that a leading question because you already said the answer. But things that I would add to that. So, from like neurologically, like in your brain, curiosity and fear actually compete for the same space in your brain. So, I don't know that a lot of people know that, but curiosity and fear are competing for that same space. And so, when fear wins that fight, the brain seeks control in that moment. But when curiosity wins in that moment, it seeks learning. So they're competing for the same space, and one of them will win, right? Control or learning. And when we talk about leadership, right, curiosity does force leaders to trade that comfort of having answers. And they have to trade that for courage. And that courage is to like ask better questions. So at the end of the day, I would summarize all the beautiful things you said, right? That like from a leadership perspective, and we're talking about an organization, control is what like maintains the system, but curiosity is what like evolves the system. And so when I'm talking about fear and curiosity, I don't think the question is really like which one did they fear. It's more of like which one are they feeding at that time, right? Which one are they feeding and which one's going to win in that moment. So it's a great question.
And relating that to our event design conversation, right? So we've talked about a path of learning, applying, reflection, talk about safe space and environments, having curiosity. A curious mind is a learning mind. How do we then, we've built this environment so people feel safe to learn and share. We've built a pathway where every day they're learning on this path and compounding the education. Where does curiosity then layer on top of all of that? Like, how do we work curiosity into content and event design?
Yeah. Well, you already read the book, so you know what I'm going to say. But for everybody else, when I design like the timeline of an event or an experience, I literally like I have a graphic in the book, and there's like a dot right at the beginning, and I call it the curiosity point. You have to have, and I very rarely say have to, right? Because our brains automatically go into like, oh my gosh, defensive mode. But you have to have a curiosity point at the beginning because that's what gets people to care, right? They're going from apathy, continuing on in their life, like, oh, I'm at this event because I have to, or oh, I need my CEUs or CMEs, right? Or like, I'm just here to have my IMEX hosted buyer appointments or whatever it is, right? And that curiosity point is what gets that 95% of your brain, that subconscious, unconscious part, to like kind of open up and be like, that's interesting. I should pay attention to this, right? And it switches you into caring, away from apathy, away from neutral, right? So you have to have that curiosity point at the beginning. And then I layer curiosity all throughout, right? So I'm intentionally designing the spaces between the content, right? Obviously the content, but we could go so deep into it, so I'm not going to, but like we have like open loops and closed loops and where curiosity lives within those. But you definitely need one at the beginning to get them to like even open up their brains to caring.
Yeah. So thinking of all the things we've talked about in this after show, if there was one place that you would advise planners to start putting curiosity at the front, like what is one application that they could go right now to their agendas, to their leadership and say, we need to do blank? What is that? Like, where
Yeah.
do planners start applying this?
This is not the answer that you're looking for, but oh my goodness, can we look at these email campaigns? Like, please, can we look at these email campaigns? I know that's not like the on-site experience that you're talking about. And like, yes, I can absolutely give you spots for that. But like,
But we know the event starts like way before
it starts
people
way
even
before.
show up on site. So
Way
I love
before.
that the email
Yes.
campaign is kind of where we're starting.
Oh my gosh, no, for real. You look at open rates, right? So one of the things that I'm doing is I'm designing these things too, right? When you're designing mindset and behavior change, it's not just when you're in person. It's the whole, like every touch point of, your participants, your customers. And so I spend a lot of time in emails, a lot of psychology and hypnotic language in like in email and speech writing. I spend a lot of time in this. And curiosity is what's going to get them to open up the email from your headline, but not like in the bad journalism way of having like a headline that relates nothing to the article. Like, can we stop doing that, please?
No clickbait, like
Right?
no
No clickbait,
clickbaiting,
right?
no tabloid
No, because
headlines.
then they open up your email and then they feel like bait and switched, and you don't want that because that's a negative feeling towards your event and your organization. So, like, what is that headline that's going to get them to open it up? What is that copy that's going to get them to be like, maybe I should click this link. Maybe I should look at this video, or I should open up this attachment that then put it in a spam filter. Like, how do I write that, right? And then it's the whole journey of you're always having to like design for like, what's that thing that's going to get them curious to take the next step, right? So not what you were expecting, but it's so important. And I'm like, I'm going to die on this grave of email campaigns.
Oh, I think it's amazing. And that's a great segue to Jay Schwedelson, who was on a couple episodes ago, talked about the same thing. And he gives amazing tips on how to spark that creativity and the curiosity in your email campaigns, because your event starts way before anyone even actually steps foot in the venue. I think that's a great place to leave it. I think curiosity is the ultimate design strategy and honestly the antidote for burnout. When we're curious, we're not people pleasing, we're getting to the root of things. And so that's like the ultimate design tip I think we can leave everyone with today. So thank you, thank you, thank you for coming. This was an incredible conversation. Get the book, read it. I have clearly holding up again with all my post-it notes of notes that I took reading it. But thank you for being here today. That's all the time we have for on another amazing dynamic dialogue on the Event About It after show. And this was a great conversation. And until next time, stay curious.